My name's Kenneth Ford, Jr. I'm a father of 2 daughters, 6 grandsons, and 1 great-grandson. I've lived my entire life in Marshall, Texas. Born and reared here. Just the warmth of being with family. I've always been very family-oriented. I was very, very, very close to my mother, and mother and other siblings at Christmas time, just a special time. We'd all come down, turn on the lights, and of course back then it was cold and we had space heaters, and we'd turn on the kitchen range, turn the burners on top of that to get heat started in the house. It was so cold. But it was a fun time. My childhood, believe it or not, from the time I was 5, 6 years old, I was working, figuring out some way to make a little bit of money. And that's just the way my childhood went. It actually forged later on what I became in the scrap metal business, because as a little bitty child, the streets over on the west side of Marshall was covered in iron ore that came from the foundry here. And if you went out there and took a little pick and stuff and dug around, you could dig up small pieces of iron that was in that slag that the city got from them to cover the streets. And I'd take my little red wagon and I'd go around and spend a day or two picking up little tiny pieces of that metal out of the streets, and then take it down to the local scrap dealer here, Jennings, and sell it. I never really got into anything until I got into about the 3rd or 4th grade. And at that point, with my dad's help, I opened up a watermelon stand. And an older gentleman, a grown man, and I got forged a relationship, and he and I borrowed some money and bought a truck. Now you gotta remember, I'm in the 4th grade at most. And he would go to Florida, South Texas, wherever, and pick up a load of watermelon or fruit and bring it back, put it off, and I would sell it. In the 4th grade, being in school, and the teacher, I guess, was kind of a civics class or something, wanted to know from the class, did anybody know who was on the dollar bill? Yeah. On the $5 bill? Yes. $10 bill? Yes. 20? Yeah. 50? Nobody knew. And I said, just a moment. And she said, what about 100? And I said, yep. And I told her, well, they sent me to the principal's office, called my mother, and my mom come up, and they said, what is this young man doing with that kind of money in his pocket? She said, he worked all summer, he made it, it's his, he can do what he wants to with it. I don't put any restrictions on him, he made it. That was the end of that, but I guess I got instilled in me early the entrepreneurial qualities of my dad especially, but I had some kind of money-making project going on most of my life. When I got out of high school, my dad said, I've got this many dollars. Do you want to go to college? And I said, no. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I kind of like the junk business. I said, I enjoyed that. And I said, I'd like to get into that. So he had a little piece of property out there where Texas Scrap is now. And he helped me set up a building on it. And I started in 1962 by myself. And for the first 3 years, I was the only person there. and I didn't have any equipment, just did everything by hand. And then I finally got to where I hired my first employee, Mickey, who was with me my entire life. Nearly, he was with me for 30 years, 40 years. But he came to work for me, and things began to pick up a little bit and started getting bigger and bigger. And I really never made any headway to speak of at all until Shirley got mad and quit her job at the insurance company and came out and went to work there. And that was the beginning of a good thing, because she could run the office and I could get outside and get work done for a change. So we both were able to accomplish some things together that I couldn't on my own. It was really, really, really tough in those first few years. At that time, Lone Star Steel was the big gun around here, but they would not take truck deliveries, only rail. And so in order to sell to them, I had to load rail cars, and I didn't have a crane, I didn't have anything. And I would load a truck, a trailer. I dug a ditch into the side of a bank, and I'd back that trailer in there, and we would load it up with scrap. I would drive it over to the rail spur and back it up to the rail car, and then we would throw it the second time out of the truck into the car. Then you'd get into the car, and the third time move it into the car where it would be positioned. And we would load rail cars by hand, 120,000 pounds apiece. And we loaded them, every piece of it, by hand. I knocked off fingers, fingernails. It was brutal. I had my competitor, Jack Applebaum, come over there one day, and he came up and he said, he said, I don't know what to say to you, he said, but there's nobody should have to do what you're doing. He said, I know it sounds crazy, he said, but if you'll get a car spotted at my yard and bring your truck down there, he said, I'll take my crane as a favor to you and unload it out of that truck into that car. And I said, Jack, that's the nicest, sweetest thing anybody's ever said to me. But I said, understand, I'm not grateful, but I said, if I do that, I've admitted defeat. I said, I've got to be in control of my future. He said, well, the offer stands. Well, I loaded rail cars for about a year. And finally, I found an old crane, and I drug it to Marshall, and I started to work on it, and I rebuilt all the gears in it that was messed up, took the engine out, and this was all new to me, but I rebuilt the engine in it, put it all back together until the day finally came. It's sitting out in front of the scrapyard there, that I cranked it up. And I said, okay, now this handle makes it lift up and down. This handle makes it swing. This one drags. And I threw it in gear, and I got excited, and I couldn't remember fast as things was happening. And it started going round and round and round, and the cable would reach and grab a sheet of tin off the top of the building. Every time you go around, it'd snatch until I had taken all the tin off the top of the building. But I taught myself how to run it, and I bought a magnet for it and rigged it up with a generator and a magnet. And I have never been any prouder. Maybe it's proud when my kids were born, but certainly not any more prouder than that machine, that I finally didn't have to hand load anything ever again. We could use it. I finally took my little company from me and Mickey and Shirley, there was three of us really in the beginning, to I think we've had as high as 30 people working there now. And then 26 years later, Texas Scrap split and I moved its sister company, River City Iron and Metal, to Shreveport and opened over there. And up until last year, I owned half of River City Iron and Metal along with my partner that I took in. But I had it for 30-something years, and Texas Scrap we've had for 55. But if you got the patience and the money to wait, you can weather through those bad times and get to the good ones, and you'll have good times for a while. And there's good things to be said about good times and bad times, because in the bad times, all your little competition that has cropped up, they all die out. And you'll end up being the only kid on the block again. And then when good times come, you'll have a period of time until they all start getting back into business again. But my dad, who started in business with me, but we didn't stay in business but a couple of years together, he taught me some things. Like, number one, he never ever would let me buy anything on credit. If I didn't have the money to buy a piece of equipment, I didn't get it. But during those bad times, if you don't owe anybody, you can't get busted out. If you owe a bunch of money, then you're gonna get yourself in trouble that you can't get out of. And he also always demanded that credit be protected at all costs. If you could go to the bank and borrow money when you needed it, it's just like having money. And when an opportunity presented itself and you just needed money to make it happen, you could go to the bank. But he instilled in me that if you owed them and you saw anything that was going to cause a hiccup, you went to them ahead of time and said, here's the deal, and I'm telling you so that you won't get excited. But I always paid the bank back to the letter of the law every single time. Consequently, if I needed a piece of equipment or if I needed to buy some scrap or whatever I needed, all I had to do was ask. And so that's the lesson that he taught me well, is that credit is a valuable thing that you need to protect at all costs. He and I just couldn't get along in the business together. So after about 2 years, I went to him and told him we was going to have to split. He said, well, okay. He said, you figure up everything we've got that we've made since we've been together, and you put a figure on it. And he said, if I like it, I'll let you pay me. And he said, if I think you're trying to screw me, he said, I'll pay you the same amount. So I made a list of everything that we had and came up, and it was like $4,000, which was a wad of money. And he said, okay, I'll take that. He said, now how you gonna pay me? And I said, I'm gonna go to the bank and see if they'll loan it to me. He said, no. He said, I'll let you pay me if you'll pay me interest. I said, okay. So it took me about 1.5 years to pay him off, but I did. And I think up there in the safe deposit box, I've still got the note and the receipt where I paid him off. And that was so funny because when we were together, he didn't give me credit for enough cents to come in and out of the rain. And once I went to him and forced the sale and bought him out and paid him, then I could do no wrong after that. It was a whole different attitude. He just admired the fact that I took control of things and brought it to a head and paid him and was on my own after that. He respected that. Shirley? Well, we were in high school together. We were high school sweethearts. I don't remember, oh, I do too. We went to the movie theater, and I had an old 57 Chevrolet station wagon. But the thing that happened is I pulled up to a red light. This is on the first go around, and it backfired. And when it did, the carburetor caught on fire, and there's fire coming out of the carburetor. And I jumped out and jerked the hood up and got the biggest, mightiest blast of air I could get in my lungs and blew, and I blew so hard I blew the seat of my pants out. And once I got the fire put out, I had to go back home and change clothes before we could go to the theater. Right after we got married, we had our first child, Susan, and that was a trip. I can still remember her waddling around in little diapers. And it turned out that was a huge joy for my father-in-law to have Susan there. She stayed there in the mornings while Shirley worked. And he got to play with her, and he really, really enjoyed her. You know, as hard as I worked, I also balanced it exactly evenly with pleasure. We traveled, we did things. I was always of the opinion that Johnny'd be a dull boy if he didn't have a little fun. And so if I worked real hard and made money, we enjoyed it. We spent it. We did something. If we were able, we'd buy a better car. If we got able, we'd buy a better house, whatever. But you should balance the hard work with enjoyment, and that's proved to be a smart thing for us. Got some really good memories of travel. Yeah, I think I'm very serious about that. I think it's a balance that you have to achieve, because if you do nothing but work ever, you're going to be a miserable you know what. So if you don't reward yourself, it's not worth it. Work as hard as you possibly can, as smart as you possibly can. Because unless you work smart and take opportunities when they come to you, you're never going to get there. You've got to be able to seize on an opportunity when it presents itself. But if you work hard and you work smart, and then, like I say, take the benefits, the bounty from what you worked, and enjoy it, then it makes it worth the effort to do again. It's almost like you reward yourself. That's the way I've always looked at it.